So there are certain things that you would need for any language pretty much anywhere on earth. And you need to know how these work in order to translate that into the language that you are trying to learn. If you have a good foundation on these three things, it will really help you on just overall being to progress faster and being able to build a good base in the language that you're trying to learn. So those three things I call SVC. So let's talk about each one. S is going to stand for subject. V is going to stand for verb. And finally, C is going to stand for complement. So what do each of these mean? Well, let's start with subject. A subject is who or what does the action. Basically, who or what does the action, or who or what does the verb. The verb is the action. And finally, the complement. I usually like to say just something extra. You can think of something complementary as kind of being included, so kind of to go along with other things. And so a complement is basically just something extra in the sentence. And it's usually in the form of a noun or an adjective. So, why are these three things important? Well, pretty much any sentence that you ever say is going to include these three things, no matter what language you're talking about. There needs to at least be a verb and a subject within the sentence, and usually there's a complement included. So let's do kind of some examples for each one. We'll start with the subject. These examples. Can you think of a subject in English real quick? You may have thought of I, or you, or he, she, it, we, y'all, they, even you guys. So you can see how there's a bunch of different subjects, but really a subject can be anything. You could also say, Carl. Carl could be a subject. You could say the refrigerator. The refrigerator. That could be a subject. Pretty much anything can be a subject, as long as it is doing the action of the sentence. So let's go into verbs now, which is, as I mentioned earlier, the action of the sentence. And so each verb kind of starts at a base form. And this is known as the infinitive in English. This basically just means a verb without a subject yet, a verb where you don't know who's doing it yet. So what that looks like is if I said, let's say, to jump, to run, to park. And the reason why I'm including a to in front of all these things is to basically just show that it's a verb specifically, because if I said the park versus to park, those are two very different things. The park is where you go to play. To park is to station a car. So you can see that I put a to in front of everything to basically show that it is indeed an action that we're talking about. And so what happens is, at least when we're doing English, the subject is going to then come in front of the verb. So, for example, if I said, I jump, or if I said, she runs, or they park. Or if we're taking like these two subjects right here, we could say Carl talks, or the refrigerator cools. A bunch of different things you could say as far as subjects go. And so this is kind of the relation between the verb and the subject in English. But it's very important to know what both of these things are, because every single sentence in any language that you ever try to learn is going to have a subject and a verb within them. It's going to have a person that's doing an action and an action itself. One more action I wanted to talk about too is the action to be. And what does that look like in a sentence? Well, I could say, Macy is tall. You can see is right here. That's to be within the third person form. Macy is tall. And so that's also a verb. It's the action of being something. Macy is being tall. So Macy is tall. Is would be the verb in this case. So let's talk about the last one, complement. It's usually just something extra to go along with the sentence. The majority of sentences have them, but I just kind of want to get into nouns and adjectives. So a noun is, I'm sure you heard this way back in elementary school, but a noun is going to be a person, a place, or a thing. So, for example, I could say Carl again, or I could say the store as a place, or I could say the table as a thing. And then if we want to look at adjectives, these are going to be things that, or let me say words that describe nouns. So for example, I could say tall, fast, wide, expensive, things like that. So if we put these in a sentence, it could look like this. The store is expensive. Carl is tall. We can see our noun is right here, the store, and our adjective right here, expensive, and then Carl, our noun, is a person, and tall is our adjective. It's describing Carl, right? So now that we've gone over these three main things, you're going to see this in pretty much any sentence in any language that you ever learn. Let's kind of do some practice identifying them. So I'm going to write a few sentences real quick. All right. So here's three sentences, and I want you to do some practice real quick, identifying where the subject, where the verb, and where the complement is within the sentence. So let's start with this first one. He runs to the park. Well, typically the easiest thing to identify first is what is the action that's being done. And that's going to be the verb. So in this case, runs, him running, that's the action. And so that's going to be our verb. And then we also need someone to do that action. So who's doing it? It's going to be he. So he is our subject. And then finally, we're getting into the complement. The park is going along with the rest of the sentence. And so that is going to be the complement right there. It's a noun, it's a place. So he runs to the park. We can see that this sentence has all three of those things within it. And I challenge you also to, if you say any sentence out loud, you will likely be able to identify all three of those things within it, because every single sentence contains one of these three, or all three of these things, pretty much, at least the subject and the verb. All right, they jump on the bed. Well, first let's start with identifying our verb. Jump is the action in this case. Who's doing it? Well, they are doing it, and so that's going to be our subject. And finally, I consider the bed, that's a noun, that's a complement. It's going along with they jump to add more details to the sentence. And so the bed is going to be the complement there. And finally, the cat is big. Here's an interesting one. This one might be a little more difficult, but if you remember, the action here is going to be is. Is a part of to be. The action is, or the cat is technically doing the action of being big. And so is going to be the action here. That's the verb. The subject is going to be the cat, as that is what is technically being big. And finally, big is going to be the complement. That's an adjective that's both describing the subject and it's describing a noun. So in certain cases, the subject, actually in every case, the subject is also going to be a noun. And so sometimes we can have an adjective to go along to complement that noun as the subject. And so If you understand kind of how all three of these things work and the necessity that these need in order to be in any language on earth, then you'll be able to do a very good job at establishing your base. As I said, every single sentence needs a subject. Every single sentence needs a verb. And the vast majority of sentences will have a complement to add more information to that sentence to go along with the subject and the verb. So, if you understood all those three things, then go ahead and you can get into the other videos that I will have up, kind of describing conjugations within Spanish and how to do them, and describing certain properties about nouns, about adjectives, about verbs, and about subjects. Pretty much anything I talk about to this point is going to involve one of these four things: a subject, a verb, a noun, or an adjective. So, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.